I am 63 years old, and I never thought I would be the kind of man who disappears. I built my life the way my father taught me. Quietly, steadily, brick by brick. 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county, I retired with a pension, a paid-off house in Knoxville, and enough in savings that I did not have to worry. My wife Carol, she was the one who kept the books. She was meticulous about it. Every statement filed, every account labeled, every password written in her neat handwriting in the small green notebook she kept in the kitchen drawer. Carol died on a Tuesday in March, 18 months before any of this happened. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to the end. I was holding her hand when she went, and after that, I did not know what to do with my hands anymore. The grief was not dramatic. It was not the kind you see in movies where a man breaks down in the rain. It was quieter than that. It was waking up and reaching for her before I remembered. It was making 2 cups of coffee every morning for the first 2 weeks before I caught myself. It was the way the house echoed when I walked through it at night. My son Philip called 2 days after the funeral. He lived in Atlanta with his wife Renee and their 2 kids. My daughter Sandra drove up from Chattanooga. She'd been closer to her mother than to me, and I understood that. My younger brother Dale lived 40 minutes away in Oak Ridge and came by with food more often than the kids did in those first months. I was grateful for the attention. I am not going to pretend I wasn't. Philip started coming up on weekends in May. He said he was worried about me being alone. I believed him. He is my son. You want to believe your son when he says he is worried about you. The first time he mentioned money, it felt natural. He said his company had been slow, that a big contract had fallen through, that he and Renee were behind on their mortgage by about 6 weeks. He asked if I could help them bridge the gap. I wrote him a check for $4,000 that same afternoon. He thanked me, said it was a loan, said he would pay me back by summer. I told him not to worry about it. Sandra came up in June. She had taken a leave of absence from her job, something with an insurance company, to figure out her next move. She needed help with her car payment, her student loans from a graduate degree she had never finished, and 3 months of back rent on her apartment. I gave her $11,000 and told her to take her time. I told myself, this was what fathers did. By August, Philip was calling twice a week. He needed a new transmission for the truck he used for work. He needed to cover Renee's hospital bill, something with her knee. He needed first and last on a new place because their landlord had raised the rent and they had decided to move. Each time I said yes. Each time he said he would pay me back. I never saw a dime returned. Carol had set up our finances through a joint checking account and 2 savings accounts. After she passed, I never changed anything. I did not see a reason to. I was still getting my pension deposits, still paying my bills. I trusted that the numbers were where they were supposed to be. That was my mistake. I trusted without looking. I had a financial advisor named Milton who Carol had found years back. He managed a portion of our retirement investments. In September, Milton called and asked to set up a review meeting. I had been putting it off because honestly, sitting in his office without Carol felt wrong. But he was insistent, and I finally agreed. I sat across from him in his office on a Thursday morning and he slid a printed summary across the desk. He did not say anything right away. He just let me look at it. The number on the page was wrong. I said that. I said, Milton, this number is wrong. He said it was not wrong. He said it was not wrong. I do not remember exactly what happened in the next few minutes. I know he got me a glass of water. I know I asked him to pull up the transaction history on the screen. I sat there and I read through 14 months of withdrawals that I had not made. Transfers to external accounts, ATM withdrawals at locations in Atlanta, online bill payments I did not recognize. The total came to just over $160,000. I drove home and I sat in Carol's chair in the living room for a long time. I did not call either of my kids that night. I needed to think. I want to tell you that I was shocked. That would be the cleaner story. But sitting there in that chair with the printed statements in my lap, I realized I had been choosing not to see it. The way Philip always called right before the weekend, the way Sandra had started asking about the house, whether I had thought about downsizing, whether I knew what it would sell for, whether I had a will updated since her mother passed. I had waved all of it off as concern. It was not concern. I called Dale the next morning. Dale is the kind of man who does not exaggerate and does not panic, and I needed both of those things. I drove to his house and I sat at his kitchen table and I laid out everything I knew. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said 3 words. Get a lawyer. I did not know what kind of lawyer. Dale helped me find an elder law attorney named Patricia Howe, whose office was in downtown Knoxville. I called that Friday and had an appointment by the following Tuesday. Patricia was somewhere in her mid-50s. Gray streaked hair. Wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She had the particular calm of someone who had heard a lot of hard things and stopped being surprised by them. I told her everything. She asked questions I had not thought to ask myself. Whether anyone had power of attorney, whether any account access had been added after Carol died, whether I had received any paperwork about my own capacity or health. That last question landed strangely. She explained what she was getting at. There was a scenario, she said, in which adult children who wanted control of a parent's finances would work to establish that the parent was no longer capable of managing their own affairs. They would document things. Missed appointments, forgetfulness, confusion. They would suggest a guardianship petition. She asked if anyone had made comments to others about my mental sharpness. I thought about a conversation Sandra had with Dale's wife at Carol's memorial. I had not been in the room, but Dale's wife had mentioned it to me later, almost in passing. Sandra had said she was worried about how I was handling things, that I seemed confused sometimes, that she was not sure I was up to making big decisions on my own. At the time, I had thought she was just grieving and projecting. Now I sat in Patricia's office, and I felt the floor shift slightly under me. Patricia said we needed to move carefully and thoroughly. First, a full forensic accounting of every account. Second, no more access for anyone. Third, no conversations with either child about finances, the house, or my plans, not until we understood the full picture. I agreed to everything. The accounting took 3 weeks. Patricia worked with a forensic accountant her office used regularly, a quiet man named Howard who communicated mostly by email and sent documents that were color-coded and precise. What they found was not just the $160,000 from the investment account. There were also withdrawals from the checking account that I had missed because I had not been reading statements carefully. Personal checks I had signed that I did not remember signing, or that had been altered in the amount after I had signed them. The total, across all accounts, was $214,000. Sandra's name was on one of the external transfer accounts. Philip's wife, Renee, was on another. I sat with that for a while. I want to be precise about what happened next because it matters. I did not call my children in anger. I did not threaten anyone. I did not post anything on social media or call anyone to warn them. What I did was follow Patricia's instructions exactly, which was to transfer all remaining accounts into new accounts under my name only, freeze any shared or accessible cards, and document everything. Then I did something I had been thinking about for weeks. I called a realtor. Carol and I had bought our house in 1991. We had renovated the kitchen in 2004, finished the basement in 2009, replaced the roof 3 years ago. The neighborhood had changed around us, in a good way. Houses on our street were selling fast and selling high. The realtor, a woman named Joanna who had sold 3 houses on our block in the past year, walked through on a Wednesday morning and gave me a number that made me sit down. She thought we could list at $825,000. She thought we would see offers over asking within 2 weeks. I told her I wanted to list the following month. I did not tell either of my children. What I did instead was plan a dinner. I know that sounds strange, but I needed to look at them directly, and I needed to say what I had to say in person, and I needed witnesses. I asked Dale and his wife Beverly to come. I told Philip and Sandra I wanted to have a family meal, that I had been doing some thinking about the future and wanted to talk through some things together. They both came. Philip and Renee drove up from Atlanta on a Saturday. Sandra came the night before and stayed in her old room. I made a full dinner. Pot roast, which had been Carol's recipe. Fresh bread. I set the table with the good dishes. After we ate, I brought out the folders. I had made a copy for each of them. Inside was a summary, not the full forensic report, but a clear accounting of every withdrawal, every transfer, every check, with dates and amounts, and the account information for where the money had gone. I set one folder in front of Philip and one in front of Sandra. I set the full report in front of myself. Dale and Beverly sat on either side of me. I said, I'd like you both to take a few minutes to look at what's in front of you. The silence in that room was something I will not forget. Philip opened his folder and stared at the first page. Renee put her hand on the table and then pulled it back. Sandra did not open hers right away. She looked at me instead. She said, Dad, I can explain. I said, I'd like you to look at the folder first." She looked at it. Philip said the withdrawals were loans, that we had discussed them. I told him I had documentation of every conversation we had about money, and none of them included authorization for transfers from my investment accounts or for altered check amounts. He said I was misremembering. I told him I had a forensic accountant and a lawyer who would disagree. Sandra started to cry. I am her father, and I have watched her cry since she was 3 years old, and I know the difference between grief and strategy. This was strategy. I told them both what was going to happen. I had already opened new accounts. They had no access to anything financial with my name on it. The house was going on the market. I had updated my will, and neither of them was in it. I had established a revocable trust. Patricia had helped me set up a durable power of attorney with Dale, so that if anything happened to my health, the right person was in charge. Philip asked what I was going to do with the money from the house. I told him that was no longer his concern. He pushed back harder than I expected. He said I was overreacting. He said families worked through financial disagreements all the time. He said I was being influenced by Dale, who had never liked him. His voice got louder. Renee put her hand on his arm. He shook it off. I said, "Philip, you are in my house right now. I am asking you to lower your voice." He did not lower his voice. He said some things I will not repeat here. I stood up. I told him dinner was over. I told him that Patricia would be in touch with both of them regarding the legal proceedings, and that they should speak with their own attorneys. I walked to the front door and I opened it. He left. Sandra left a few minutes later. She did not say anything on her way out. At the door, she turned back once, like she was going to say something, but then she didn't. Dale helped me clear the table. Beverly washed the dishes. Nobody said much. The house went on the market 11 days later. Joanna had been right. We had 3 offers by the end of the first weekend, 2 of them over asking. I accepted a clean offer of $850,000 from a family relocating from Ohio. They had a baby and a toddler, and they wanted to be in the school district before fall. The closing was on a Thursday in March, 14 months after Carol had died. I sat across the table from the buyers and signed my name 41 times and handed over the keys to a house I'd lived in for 32 years. I did not cry until I got to my car. But they were not the same tears as the ones I had cried when Carol died. Those had been helpless tears. These were different. These were the tears of a man who had made a decision and followed through on it, and who felt both the grief of what was ending and something quieter on the other side. Something that I can only describe as solid. After fees and closing costs, I walked away with $811,000. Patricia's office had already helped me identify a financial planner who had no prior relationship with my family. I transferred the proceeds directly into accounts my children had no knowledge of. I set aside a portion for the legal proceedings. Yes, I was pursuing recovery of the $214,000. Patricia said our chances were reasonable given the documentation we had. I had also done something else, something I had thought about for a long time before I did it. Carol and I had talked, years before she got sick, about what we wanted to leave behind. We had both come from nothing. Her from a small town in eastern Kentucky, me from a working-class neighborhood in Knoxville where nobody had savings accounts. We had talked about setting up a scholarship, something small but real, for kids at the community college who were working 2 jobs and still could not make the tuition gap work. I set it up in Carol's name. The Carol Ann Braddock Memorial Scholarship. First year funded at $25,000. I told Dale. I told Patricia. I did not tell my children. I had rented a small apartment in Maryville while I figured out the next step. It was on the 2nd floor of a quiet building near a park. 2 bedrooms, which was 1 more than I needed. In the mornings, I made coffee and sat by the window and listened to the birds. I had brought Carol's African violets with me. She had grown them on the kitchen windowsill for years, and I could not leave them. Philip tried to reach me 3 times in the first 2 weeks. I did not answer. He sent a letter, an actual paper letter, to Dale's address, which Philip apparently thought I might be staying at. In it, he said he wanted to work things out. He said the family needed to heal. He said he hoped I understood that everything he had done had come from a place of love and worry about my well-being. I read it twice. I folded it carefully and put it in the folder with the forensic accounting documents. Sandra emailed me. She said she was sorry. She said she had made mistakes and she knew it. She said she missed me. She said the kids, my grandchildren, asked about me. That one was harder. I thought about my grandchildren for a long time. I thought about what it would mean to cut myself off from them entirely versus what it would mean to allow their parents access to me through them. I did not have a clean answer. I still don't. What I did was write them each a letter. My grandson Tyler, who was 8, and my granddaughter May, who was 5. I kept the letters simple because they are children. I told them I love them. I told them I was doing well. I told them I was doing well. I told them I would reach out again when the time was right. I gave the letters to Patricia to hold until she could arrange for them to be delivered through appropriate channels without requiring contact with their parents. It was the best I could do. About 6 weeks after I moved into the apartment, I drove to a hardware store and bought a small workbench kit I had been looking at online. I set it up in the second bedroom. I had spent 31 years calculating load-bearing stresses and drainage grades and foundation depths, and I had a feeling that retirement was going to hollow me out if I did not find something to do with my hands. I started building birdhouses. It sounds like a joke, but it isn't. I build them carefully, with proper joinery, small pitched roofs, the right hole diameter for the species I'm trying to attract. I read about it. I built 7 in the first 2 months. I put 4 of them up in the park near my building. There is a Carolina wren nesting in one of them. I know because I check on it every morning on my walk. I am not going to tell you that I am at peace with what happened. Peace is a word people use when they want a story to have a clean ending, and my story does not have a clean ending yet. The legal proceedings are ongoing. My son and I have not spoken. My daughter and I have not spoken. There are grandchildren I love and cannot see freely. What I can tell you is that I am still here. I am making my own decisions. Nobody is managing me, or speaking for me, or quietly redirecting my assets to accounts I do not control. I wake up in the morning and the money in my accounts is the same money that was there when I went to sleep, and that is something I do not take for granted anymore. Carol would have been angry about all of this, I think. Not at me. At them. She was a gentler person than I am in most ways, but she had a firm sense of what was right, and what happened was not right. I think about what she would have said, and I think she would have told me to stop second-guessing myself and go take a walk. So that is what I do. Every morning, coffee by the window with the violets. Been down to the park to check on the wren. I built this life. I am the one who gets to decide what happens to it. And if you are watching this because you recognize something in this story, if you are somewhere in the middle of it right now, not sure what you know and not sure what to do, I just want you to know that you are not foolish for having trusted. You are not weak for having wanted your family to be what you hoped they were. But you are allowed to see clearly. You are allowed to act on what you see. You built it too. Where are you watching this from? Leave it in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. Not to punish myself with it, but to actually understand it. The way you understand a structural failure after the fact. When you can see exactly where the load exceeded what the material could bear. I spent 31 years calculating how things hold together, and I still missed it happening in my own house. What I have come to believe is this. What Philip and Sandra did was not a sudden thing. It built slowly, over months, in the space that grief opened up inside me. I was not weak. I was bereaved. There is a difference. But the result was the same. I stopped watching, and people who had decided I was a resource rather than a person took advantage of that. The cause was not cruelty for its own sake. I don't think either of my children woke up one morning and decided to be the kind of people they turned out to be in this story. I think they saw an opportunity and told themselves a story about why it was acceptable. That story probably involved words like, he has more than he needs and he would want us to have it, and he's not thinking clearly anyway. People are very good at writing themselves into the role of the reasonable party. But the effect was real. $214,000. My name on accounts I did not recognize. My signature on checks I did not write. And a slow, quiet plan to have me declared incompetent, to take the decision-making out of my hands entirely before I noticed what was missing. When I think about what stopped that from happening, it was not luck. It was one phone call from Milton. It was the fact that Carol had been careful enough to establish a relationship with a financial advisor years before either of us needed one. It was Dale telling me to get a lawyer instead of telling me to call my kids and work it out. Small things, deliberate things that compounded in my favor the same way the withdrawals had compounded against me. That is the part I want people to hear. The outcome of a situation like this is not random. It follows from decisions, theirs and yours. Every time I signed a check without asking questions, that was a decision. Every time I did not open my statements because the grief made the kitchen feel too empty to sit in, that was a decision. I am not blaming myself for being human. I am saying that clarity, even when it is painful, is always the better tool. I built the Carol Ann Braddock Memorial Scholarship because I wanted something real to come out of all of it, not just a wound. Carol believed in people who worked hard without a safety net because we had been those people once. Putting $25,000 a year toward a kid who was working 2 jobs and still coming up short. That is what I chose to do with the first year of my freedom. It did not heal anything, but it was mine to decide. That mattered more than I can explain. I check on the wren every morning. It sounds like a small thing, but there's something in watching a small creature build a home inside something I made with my own hands. In a park I can walk to, in a life that nobody else is managing for me. There is something in that which I do not have a better word for than dignity. I still do not know how this ends with my son and my daughter. I do not know if it ends at all or just continues at the distance I have set. What I know is that I am the one setting it, and I know that Tyler and May have letters waiting for them, written by their grandfather, that say the one thing I most want them to understand, that love is not the same as money, and that what a person builds with their life belongs to them until they choose otherwise. I chose otherwise, just not the way anyone expected.